Hello, I'm George Malin, the Managing Editor of IoT Now magazine, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar. The topic of our discussion today is delivering scale for IoT connectivity, and that's a really important topic as the market moves from initial trials and early pilot deployments, and organizations start to plan for scale and look at how to manage the ecosystem in what is still a very unstandardized environment. There's also a focus on reducing time to market, which is important because as trials are successful, organizations need to be able to scale up rapidly. I'm delighted to welcome onto today's panel Robin Duke-Woolley, who's an analyst and the Chief Executive at Beecham Research. Robin will be speaking shortly, and he'll also be joined by Mohsen Mohseninia, the Vice President of Market Development at Aeris, and his colleague Evan Whitelock, the Product Marketing Manager at Aeris. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Robin Duke-Woolley from Beecham Research. Robin, over to you.
Thanks very much, George. Yes, so I've got just a few slides, a couple of slides really, just to get the picture, the mood really, which is what is happening in the marketplace at the moment. So my first point here is that we're seeing tremendous endpoint growth. By endpoint, I mean sensors and devices, anything that's at the end of the network. And over the period 2016 to 2020, we're looking at a 20 times growth of that. So many more endpoints over the coming period. But plus, for your average endpoint, and of course sensors don't really count from this point of view, much more data per endpoint. So in a device, there's much more interest in getting more data, more applications. And really that takes us to the third point, is more richer data for a variety of different purposes, of which we can say that it's either going to be operation optimization, driving efficiency, driving cost, or greater emphasis on new services revenue, new service opportunities, and moving companies from being, say, product-only companies to product and service companies. So, tremendous opportunities and great growth there, and the message is, we think, really beginning to catch hold in the marketplace. Also, solutions are moving from local to global. So beyond the national borders, international organizations are moving out and seeing the opportunities of bringing their solutions into an international domain. And then we think that it's going to become more normal to connect to all assets and devices wherever they are, rather than just a few by exception. So we're not at that point yet, but it's going to come soon where it's going to become more meaningful to have everything connected rather than just those that are the lowest cost, for example. Because it's really the perceived value of the service that's being offered rather than the increase in cost. So that's going to change the perception, I think, in the marketplace in the near future. And of course, we're seeing multiple forms of connectivity technology in one solution, because when you've got all of these endpoints, they need to be connected often in different ways. And there are lots of different endpoints doing lots of different things at lots of different levels in company operations that need to be connected in future. So multiple forms of connectivity, and that's a big challenge for deploying an IoT solution. And then the next set of trends is that all of this means that we're moving more towards end-to-end solutions, moving from being nice to have to being a strategic necessity. They are, in fact, a competitive advantage in the marketplace, and I think that's becoming much more recognized. That's becoming more recognized in particular when it's related to new service opportunities, but also even when looking at cost benefits coming from them. And that means that IoT solutions inevitably are becoming more mission critical, particularly when it's related to service revenue that's basically expected to come. It's much more important to make sure that it's catered for on a continuous basis, and that leads us then to the 10th point, high availability becoming essential. it's no longer appropriate, no longer really feasible to have downtime on these solutions. They must be available all the time to cater for the new demands. And at the same time, there's an increasing need for interoperability with other solutions. They're no longer little islands. They need to interoperate and share data and move forward to provide a richer environment for the solutions that are needed in the future. So it's not just about connectivity, it's about a complete solution with data visualization, much more use of real-time processing of data, and creating instant pictures of what is happening, and then moving forward with that. And of course, in all of this, there's an increasing need for end-to-end security at all levels, not just at the connectivity level, but right across the solution and all parts of the stack. So all of these things are becoming increasingly important. Now, what does that mean from an implementation point of view? Well, it means that it's not just a case of buying what fits today, buying a solution that works today. It's not really the real story. The real story is buying what's going to work tomorrow, because there's going to be a lot of change over the coming years. There's going to be a lot of further growth. Any company that has an IoT solution needs to think about not just what it needs now, but what it's going to need in the future. Because changing the system later, if it turns out that there's a problem and it can't scale, for example, is costly and very disruptive to operations, particularly as they become mission critical. So it's very important to be clear about the growth prospects and to understand the constraints of the solution that are being looked at, and to find a way around those, and to think more conceptually about what is going to be required moving forward. So in all of that, scalability of connectivity, of the processing of the data, of the resources, and of course the budget, because how much does it all cost? How much does the operation cost? Does that scale well as well? All of those need to be considered. And that's really, I think, the basis of the discussion with Aeris today in the webinar. So I'm going to hand back to George, who's going to take us through a first poll, and then we'll get into the presentations from Aeris. So back to you, George.
Great. Thank you very much, Robin. I think that was a great way to set the scene. So we come to the first of today's poll questions, and the question is, at what stage is your IoT deployment? And the possible responses are, have not started. The second response is, it's in development. The third response is, it's in development and scaling. And the fourth response is, we're designing our next generation solution. So the question again is, at what stage is your IoT deployment? And the possible responses are, have not started, in development, in deployment and scaling, or designing our next generation solution. Just while I wait for all the responses to come in, I'd remind you that we have an open Q&A with all of our panel at the end of the webinar today. So do feel free to submit questions in the Q&A panel on your screen, and I'll put those to our panelists. So that would be very good. We'll now try and get the results of the poll and see what the outcome is. So there's a bit of a mixed bag there, but I think that partly reflects what Robin was talking about in his presentation. Interesting to see that 31% are already designing their next generation solution. So I think that's an interesting point for sure. So that's certainly encouraging and positive. So I'd like to bring in Evan Whitelock from Aeris at this point, and hand the floor over to him for his part of today's webinar. Thank you very much for your responses. Over to you, Evan.
Great. Thank you, George. So it's very nice to see the poll results there that we do have a bit of a mixed bag because, the challenges with regards to scalability don't necessarily just come at the beginning or at the end. There are challenges along every step going from development through deployment to the next gen, and we'll be talking about some of that as we go through this next set of presentations. So also like to thank Robin for doing a great job of setting the stage for us today and giving a little bit of background around why we're here talking about scalability and these three challenges, which are some of the more common challenges that we've seen in working with customers and working through them. And it's really around how to manage the ecosystem, which is not only constantly changing but not quite set in terms of the players and technologies that are out there. The second is really how to plan around success and with your deployment and plan to scale in designing your processes and support systems and so forth that will promote eventual scale and not prevent that. And then the last challenge is reducing time to market, both in the initial development and deployment and launching that first solution, but then also in launching the next generation solutions and getting solution enhancements to market faster, certainly help with scaling. So these are three of the main points that we're going to cover today. And before we jump into it, I did want to give a little bit of background about Aeris for those of you that are not familiar with who we are. Just to give you a little context as to why we're here at the table presenting to you today. So Aeris is an IoT solutions provider, a global IoT solutions provider. Our headquarters are in Santa Clara, California, which is where I'm located today. And we do have offices around the world, including the Reading in the UK, which is our next presenter from Aeris, Mohsen, that's where he is located. We also have a second office in Chicago, Illinois, also in India, and then a joint venture with SoftBank in Japan. Our company is over 250 people today. It's actually up closer to 275, and with over half of those people focused on engineering and operations. And so, the DNA, the makeup of our company is really around providing innovative IoT solutions and for connectivity, for platforms, and for solutions to customers around the world. And to provide a few numbers, few figures that add a little bit more context there. Across our global networks today, we support over 10 million devices, IoT devices. We are exclusively an IoT focused company. We don't do anything with consumer handsets and so forth. That 10 million number actually puts us in the top 10 worldwide in terms of IoT units under management. Those 10 million units across all our systems are doing over 1 billion IoT messages a day. That's everything from cellular network registrations, deregistrations, to actual transactions, whether it be packet data, SMS, voice, and so forth, but then also application messages that those devices are producing. And we do have an operational reach of over 180 countries, so we truly are a global provider and have a global presence. So again, just wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about who we at Aeris are, just to for those that are not familiar, and provide a little context. But now that we got that out of the way, we can jump into what we really want to talk about today, which is how to solve these challenges as it relates to scalability in IoT. And to provide a little bit more on those three challenges, when we look at the IoT ecosystem as it is today, managing that ecosystem is a challenge. Again, because there are more and more players every day entering this market. As Robin had mentioned, the growth in IoT is so large that it's attracting more and more companies wanting to get involved, and which is a great thing. There's certainly so much potential in IoT that the more involvement is going to drive progress forward. But it does create some confusion around what technologies to move forward with, which ones are going to become standardized, which technologies will remain sort of in niche markets and niche solutions, and which partners to trust moving forward, which is certainly a challenge that we'll hopefully look to clarify today. The second piece is planning for scale. A lot of the systems that you will put in place when you initially design your system can have a tremendous impact on whether you can or cannot scale down the road. If you have only deployed a support system for your local country, for example, when you do look to expand internationally, if you haven't set up processes and supply chains that enable you to do that, it can be very difficult and costly to make those material changes to your systems to enable that scalability. And then the third one being reducing time to market. Again, this is not just necessarily for reducing time to market at the beginning of your your solution development and deployment, that first phase, but also when you do need to make changes down the road, when you need to come out with the next, the second generation, if you need to make service upgrades to your solution to prevent becoming obsolete in the marketplace. All of, getting that out the door into market faster will make a tremendous impact on how successful you are scaling. So keep these in mind as we go through. These are the 3 points we're going to look to cover today. And we will jump in and cover the first point now, which is the ecosystem. As I mentioned, it's now a very crowded ecosystem, a very non-standardized ecosystem, and lots of, technologies that both work well together but also compete against each other. This can make it difficult when you're looking to piece together your solution. And I know one of the practices that many companies follow is to put together a best-in-breed solution and pick the best technologies and the best partners for each technology. And while there's certainly value in doing that, that increases the complexity of your solution and development rather significantly. And so one way to help work around that is to look for providers that offer a more complete technology stack that can give you not only just the connectivity, but also the connectivity management and perhaps the data management or the application layer as well. Many times in a lot of how we've gone about architecting our full stack is to make those pieces work better together. Not only make it easier to launch solutions on the different platforms, but there's added security, there's added interoperability that makes those systems work better together, and it can solve a lot of problems for you as you look to get your solutions out there. So one recommendation would be to consider companies that can do more for you than just one single piece of the IoT solution. The second concept here is around the standardization, or really lack of standardization across IoT technologies. And there are many technologies out there today that have been around for a while, such as, if you look at connectivity, the cellular technologies and 2G, 3G, GSM, HSPA, which are global technologies. And now that LTE is coming out is out and available in most countries, and LPWA technologies are being introduced and are gaining traction in certain areas. The lack of standardization on some of those, especially some of the unlicensed LPWA technologies that are available, we're still kind of waiting to see which technologies will become standardized, which technologies will ultimately win out in the marketplace. And the advice from us is to not wait for those technologies to become standardized and to move forward with what's available today. And there are things that you can do to make it easier to manage those technologies. For example, a single connectivity management platform across all different underlying technologies, whether it is cellular, whether it is LTE, whether it is LPWA technologies, giving you as the manager of your deployment the ability to seamlessly have deep visibility and control into those technologies, regardless of again technology or deployment location, will enable you to scale with those technologies and enable you to scale on a global basis as you're ready to do that. Because not all technologies are available in all global locations. And then the last piece of advice we have on how to manage the ecosystem is to not just believe the PowerPoints, but look for the companies that do have proven real world results. There are, like I mentioned, a lot of companies brand new to IoT, but not a lot of companies that have proven success in IoT. And so look for the partners with the proven success that can help you navigate this unstandardized ecosystem. And with that, I would like to bring in my coworker Mohsen, who's, as Jordan mentioned, VP of Market Development in Europe, who's going to talk us through a couple use cases of how we've helped customers solve these challenges in the real world. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mohsen.
Thank you, Evan. I just need to flick to the next slide, I believe. As Evan said, and as Robin indicated, scalability comes in different forms, shapes, and means. It could be scalability in terms of number of nodes that are being deployed. It could be scalability in terms of the volume of data that is being collected, or it could be a combination of both. And so a couple of use cases that we're going to go through and show you how some of our customers have actually worked with us in terms of addressing their scalability issue. Here's an example of a global fleet management company that started in the United States, and its product was very, very powerful product, and it managed to get tractions across various markets in the world, and started scaling based on different technologies, started with CDMA technology, and where it was prevalent in the United States, but not many other places. We helped them to actually then roll out their solution based on GSM HSPA technology across multiple markets, and in recent times LTE has been added to it. And whilst we helped them to actually roll out their solution across those using those technologies, we kept the same interface with their systems and processes, meaning that they have the same management platform for managing those technologies, regardless of whether it's LTE or whether it's LPWA or whether it's CDMA. They get single financial transactions coming to them, and they have a single contract to manage. And they have gone from something around 20, 30,000 deployed to something close to about 400,000 units deployed. And basic answer that we get from them when we ask the question about the solution that they have are the results that they refer to, which is we've simplified their supply chain and we've reduced their operational costs because they didn't need to work through multiple stovepipes to deal with different type of technology. And we provided them obviously with the ability, with our knowledge and our understanding of different markets, different operators and different arrangements to provide them with this ubiquitous uniform service that then allows them to deliver their service in a uniform way to their customers. The second example is about volume of data. So in this case, the number of deployed devices are very small. They are in thousands rather than hundreds of thousands or millions. However, each node, each plane, which is a node in this network, generates close to a petabyte of data every time it lands, where it's collected all the data from its various sensors. And that data needs to be downloaded to a data management platform very rapidly and processed such that the ground staff can get work orders in terms of maintaining that plane and turning it around in the shortest possible time and get the plane ready to fly. The issue here for the manufacturer of the plane is that the shorter time they can keep the plane on the ground, the more valuable that plane is to the carrier that operates that plane. Remember, carriers make money when the plane is in the air, and they lose money when the plane is on the ground. So by turning around the plane quickly, they can make more efficiency for the carrier and therefore more money for the carrier. But processing petabytes of data, ingesting it in a data management platform, processing it and creating rules and creating work orders is not a trivial activity given that you've got the time pressure. So at Aeris, we have our analytic and our IoT data management platform that works at near real-time speeds, and it's an elastic platform that we have developed purely because of scalability requirements in the cloud that allows the customer to process these hundreds of thousands of data points very rapidly and provide an efficient solution for its customers and differentiate its products in the market. But the point being that there were alternative solutions for the customer, but it was not feasible from a commercial point of view to deploy those solutions. Part of the scalability is that if your scalability is linear, i.e. your cost goes up as you scale up, it is not actually going to work for you. So you need to be thinking about, how do I scale where my costs don't go up in line with the scale of my deployment, with the size of my deployment. So we've been able to do that for this customer, as the note says at the bottom, as a tenth of the alternative price, alternative solution that was available. The third case study that I will go through very quickly is about a OEM that has actually realized that by not having an end-to-end solution at manufacturing time for their vehicles and trucks, they're actually losing a lot of money. But their challenge is slightly different. They produce hundreds of thousands of these vehicles, and they get deployed in 100 to 200 different places around the world, and their value chain has got multiple stakeholders, from their own manufacturing to their finance and leasing organizations, to their distributorships, to the fleet organizations, to the end users. So the general fleet telematics solutions tend to be very stovepipe for one purpose only, whilst this customer wanted to have a solution that is flexible enough and open enough to allow for various stakeholders in his value chain to be able to take benefit of the data that is generated from its assets, from its trucks or vehicles. So we've been able to provide a global solution that includes the connectivity, the data management, the analytics, and the application as a service, software as a service for this customer, to enable them to come to market very rapidly and start deploying and actually tapping into the revenue that up to that moment they did not have. So those are the three examples that I had to share with you today, and I'm going to hand over to Evan to take it to the next slide.
Hi,
Great.
thank you, Mohsen.
Yeah, George, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, George.
I'm going to handle the poll and then pass back for comments. The second of today's poll questions is, what is the main barrier for scaling your current IoT deployment? And the possible answers are cost, security, support, supply chain, service quality, and global coverage. I'll give the question and the possible responses again. What is the main barrier for scaling your current IoT deployment? Cost, security, support, supply chain, service quality, or global coverage? And while those are correlating, I'd urge you to use the Q&A panel on your screen to ask a question to our panel, which we'll be doing after the presentations have concluded. Let's see what the results of the poll were. And cost clearly is the driver. Second is security, which I guess we'd expect with the current climate. Mohsen and Evan, do you have any comments to make on the findings of this poll?
I am frankly not surprised by the answer that cost is, because at the end of the day, what will get us to the kind of numbers that Robin was alluding to will be the cost effectiveness of the solutions that are being deployed. Cost per se, it's a small word that encapsulates a lot of things, but I think it's cost effectiveness. Because there are lots of business cases that, as our VP of Engineering says, there isn't a use case in the world that you can think about that IoT cannot impact. However, the question is, how cost effective is that? So as we get more cost effective solutions, we get closer and closer to the kind of numbers that Robin was talking about. So that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that security is an issue. We've seen all the press releases and all the events that have taken place. Absolutely correct. And I'm very pleased to see support is actually one of the key areas that some of the attendees are referring to. absolutely, support is fundamental to the success of the program. Being able to support customers all the way through their deployment lifecycle, all the way through from cradle to grave, would be fundamental to the success of these programs. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's for me.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to you, Mohsen, for the continuation of the presentation.
Evan.
Oh, it's Evan. Sorry.
You go to Evan.
Yeah. No worries. So perfect. Well, great. And especially looking at the results, which, to expand on or, really reiterate what Mohsen had said, really not surprising and pretty in line with what our expectations are and what we've seen from our own experience. And so, that's actually the cost topic is a good segue into the next point, which is planning to scale and how to create systems that will enable you to scale effectively and with an efficient cost structure. And what we've seen is that a very large impact on that comes with the availability or lack thereof of platforms and management capabilities that can deliver much more efficient, whether it's support or supply chain services and capabilities that can materially decrease your cost. Starting with operational efficiency, it's, especially when we look at managing, an IoT deployment from looking at the connectivity, rogue devices, troubled devices can cause a very material impact to not only the quality of service, but also the costs that are associated. If a device has a bug and it's sending 10 times more data than it's supposed to, without proactive alerts, alarms, and management capabilities, you'd be left, waiting. You wouldn't find out until the end of the month when your bill comes and it's, materially higher. Being able to control those connectivity costs on a global deployment is what's going to help reduce the burden on your support team and enable that global expansion. Being able to monitor devices and troubleshoot them remotely from a single platform, from a single desktop, really single support team, is what's going to help you become more efficient operationally and help you expand globally, especially when considering, moving to a global scale, maybe the need for different technologies where in one region you were using one technology, but as you go to a different region, using a different technology. We had a lot of customers using CDMA here in the United States, which is not as widely available globally. As they moved to a global deployment, they had to also look to GSM HSPA deployments and being able to have those on a single platform, a single management set of processes across all technologies helped them expand globally. And the third point here on the supply chain, management platforms can have a tremendous impact on how automated a supply chain can be. Being able to activate devices early and test them and save costs as your devices go through your supply chain while they're live but not billable can make a very material impact on your supply chain and how quickly and how effectively you're able to scale. And so with that, I know that Mohsen has an example of the supply chain and how, a management platform can make a material impact. So I will hand it back to you, Mohsen.
Thank you, Evan. One thing that, again, coming back to the cost that everybody's, or majority of attendees refer to, in order to get the cost down, the only way to get the cost down is automation, and automation. So the more we automate the processes, the more incremental cost of adding more to the pool of our IoT devices and services will come down. So at Aeris, what we have done, we have developed what we refer to as a SIM lifecycle management, which helps our customers to actually reduce their cost from the minute that they decide that they want to launch a product in a market and they want to get the SIMs into their devices, get the devices out in a market, and all the way to the end of life for those devices. There are various steps that a SIM or a connection, shall we call it, will go through. One would be its provisioned state where the SIM is available and active. Sorry, I need to go to the next one. Where the SIM is provisioned, it's active, it's live, and it's ready to send and transmit data. But the customer may have that SIM in a factory, in a manufacturing place, being installed on its device, where its device needs to then go through some testing where it is, or the device has gone to its distributor, where the distributor needs to demonstrate the solution to its end customer. And during that part, the end customer of us does not want to be billed for that activity because is not generating any revenue from that deployment because it hasn't gone to the end customer, it hasn't been deployed. So when the SIM is provisioned and is shipped to the customer, the customer will use the SIM as it's shown at the top. Customer starts using the pre-activated SIM, and either the SIM will automatically become billable without any interference because it is consumed all of its allowable provisioned data, or the system has detected that the SIM is being used on a regular basis and therefore it is an active device. So the SIM becomes active and the bills start being generated. The monthly revenue will kick in as it's indicated at the bottom. When the devices are now working, some customers, for example, in agricultural field, may have seasonal deployment. What that means is that there are periods of time that these assets, these devices, the application that they have is not being utilized. And if they have to pay for that connectivity whilst their assets are not being utilized and they're not generating any revenue, that actually impacts their ability to scale because it's costing them money and no revenue being generated. So what we have available for those customers is the ability for them to, suspend their device and take it into maintenance, do whatever they need to do with that asset, maybe repair it, maybe change bits and pieces on it, and even test during that period that everything's working. So whilst they are in a suspend mode, live provision mode, they will have some data available to them for their testing purposes to make sure that when the device is now ready to go back to field for operation, everything's working okay. And again, like the provision, the device will resume billing status when it is detected that it's used its allowable data or it's been used contiguously for a period of time. When that device comes to the end of life, the customers can cancel the service or the SIM, at which point that SIM is rendered end of life. And at Aeris, we then will strip the assets of that SIM, the IMSI, the ICCID, and other collaterals that are on the SIM, and we use those for other activities. But all of that process end-to-end is automated. So it really requires no human intervention from the minute that the SIMs are shipped to the customer to the minute that the SIMs are cancelled. And that is taking a large amount of cost out of the entire life cycle management of that connectivity, regardless of where that connectivity is. So that was just one example of automation that we have implemented to enable customers to deploy solutions cost effectively and rapidly. I'm going to hand over to Evan to go through the next slide for you.
Great, thank you, Mohsen. So bringing us to our final point, which is reducing time to market as you're launching your solution. And again, it's everything from launching your initial solution where, our advice is really to launch now. There's always going to be something else to wait for, whether it's an emerging technology, an easier time. You think that things might slow down for you, other aspects of your business, and it'll be a better time to launch then. The reality is launching now is the best way to go forward. To get out there, to start getting your feet wet, to start your deployment especially if you've found the right partners, leveraging the right platform capabilities that will make scaling easier for you down the road. Getting devices out there, getting that business to start generating revenue for you is one of our biggest pieces of advice, is to just go get started. And there's different ways to get started. Obviously, in IoT, we see very long development cycles, and there's a lot to plan out, especially if you are building a highly customized solution, whether it's the hardware or the application and so forth. And so one recommendation to help speed up that process is to look for off-the-shelf solutions that will help you get to market faster. One very common hardware approach we've seen is for customers to use off-the-shelf modems and pre-certified devices for their initial deployment, to leverage those. And while they are slightly more expensive, and it is more cost efficient to build your own device on your own module, for example, at scale, using those off-the-shelf devices can solve a lot of those initial hurdles for you up front, whether it be certifications and so forth, to get you to market faster, to prove out your business model, discover what tweaks you need to make those tweaks, and then scale with proprietary hardware and so forth. And the same can be said on the application side as well. Looking for companies that also provide data management or application enablement platform capabilities that will help you build your application, build your solution faster, and get it launched faster, as opposed to taking everything on in-house and designing everything yourself. Especially given that most that are deploying their first IoT solution are new to IoT. And there's lots of experience that can be shared from companies that have a lot of those off-the-shelf tools and capabilities to help make your life easier. And as I had mentioned, and Robin had a great point earlier during his slides about it's not just about buying what fits your needs today, but also planning for what's going to fit in the future. And as he had mentioned, it can be very costly to make large changes to your solution down the road, whether it's to the hardware, the application, or to the processes. Keeping in mind some of the things we've talked about planning for success can make that easier for you. But certainly when we look at the ability to dynamically change your solution or make changes to your solution over time without having to go through a redesign, can help alleviate some of the cost and concern and delays around redesigning your solution. This is something that we work with customers on and encourage customers to think about when they are designing their application is, if you need to make a change, if you want to add service capability at a later time, if you need to make an adjustment, if there will always be bugs that you did not plan for, problems, issues that arise. And so our recommendation is to plan on having a solution for when those issues come up. And one great example that we have that we helped the customer work through that is a customer that had a firmware issue, and using our analytics, they were able to identify that and change that. And so for more information on that, I'm going to hand it back to Mohsen to walk through how we were able to help that customer out.
Sure. Thank you, Evan. So this is an example of a customer that has deployed today about 2 million devices on our global network. And to start with, they did significant amount of testing with their equipment and their services, and everything was working fantastic, and there was no issue. And then they started rolling out. And as they rolled out, we noticed peculiar behavior of some of their devices on our network through the analytic tools that we have available. And those transpired to be a major firmware error on the actual device that they were deploying. Now, fortunately, we were able to capture that error when they had 20,000 of these devices on our network. Today, they have 2 million. You can imagine what the cost would have been if that issue was not detected early enough in the process for them to have to update and upgrade 2 million devices, both in terms of the impact to their brand, as well as the customer experience, as well as the costs that are associated with that. So our ability to be able to actually use the information that comes from the network to compare and contrast the behavior of their devices and provide real-time analytics across the entire state was fundamental to being able to identify the problem fast and early enough in the cycle for it to be dealt with in a timely manner. So that is important to note that despite all the testing and all the rigor that everybody goes through, things go wrong. And the question is, who can help the deployed devices, the organization owning that IoT deployment? Who can help them with actually dealing with issues when things go wrong? And what tools and capabilities do those organizations bring to the table to allow the early detection of issues and come up with constructive way of actually addressing those issues and resolving those problems? That would be fundamental to A, reducing the cost, overall cost, and B, the scalable deployment across many years for an IoT deployment. With that said, I'm going to hand over back to Evan to wrap up and pass to George after that.
Great, thank you, Mohsen. And I know we want to get to the Q&A, so I will just go through this very quickly. But just to sum up kind of the three main points that we've covered today, the challenge of trying to manage and work your way through this complex ecosystem. Our suggestion, our advice is to leverage the experts that know the ecosystem. Find partners you can trust. Find partners that do have proven results and proven history of supporting very large deployments. Everyone you talk to will say that they can scale, but look for the companies that are currently supporting deployments well into the millions. They know how to support those. They can help you think about what potholes will be coming up and what to work around. So leverage the experts that really know the ecosystem. Second is to plan to be successful. When you're creating your support structures, your operational processes, your supply chains, look for tools that are going to enable your success long term. Plan for what that success will look like, and make sure that your processes do not hold you back when it is time to scale. And then last but not least is reducing your time to market. And again, that's not just for the initial launch of your solution, which again is our advice is to move forward, and even if it's in pieces or phases, get out there, start being successful, and then scale. But then also think about how you can create your systems to enable upgrades over time in case there are issues, which there will be. How do you address those? Or if you need to make changes to your solution to make it more modern without having to go through a complete system redesign. Be thinking about those things as you go to market and as you plan your success. So with that concludes the content portion of the presentation, and I'm going to hand it back to George, who's going to walk us through one poll question, then we'll open it up for Q&A.
That's great. Thank you very much, Evan, and thank you, Mohsen. We're just having a quick poll to assess how we can refine things in the future. So it's a very simple one. How useful was the content of this webinar? And the options are very useful, somewhat useful, or not useful. So that's how useful was the content of this webinar, and we'll take the information we get from that and use that for our future plans. Now, let's move on to the Q&A. We have our panel. We've still got Robin Duke-Woolley from Beecham Research with us, and we've also got Mohsen and Evan also. We've had some questions in. There'll probably be time to answer a few more, so don't be shy, and feel free to ask questions to us, and I'll direct them to our panelists today. But let's take a question to get the ball rolling. The first question is, when in the early stages of building an IoT solution, what are the capabilities that should be prioritized? And I think that'll probably be interesting to get everyone's view on that. So whoever is ready to speak first, what are the capabilities that you should prioritize in the early stages of building an IoT solution? Bit of thinking time, I think.
Yeah, this is Evan. I can take the first stab at this one.
Thank you, Evan.
I think one of the things that's very important to be thinking about, to our, and I won't go. I'll say that security is a very important one, but I think that's something that most people agree with, and is a very important topic, and especially in today's world. Designing a secure solution it's almost getting to the point of that becomes a requirement, not an option. But I think some of the other capabilities and things to think about are around ongoing support for your solution, and especially on a global scale. How to make sure that your devices, your solution is working as much as possible. It's only going to help with not only your cost structure and not just as it relates to the solution itself, but the cost structure for supporting the people running your solution, but also the customer experience. With a poor support structure, you will have unhappy customers who won't come back and won't buy more. So that's a very important one, I think. And I'll see if Robin or Mohsen want to chime in on anything else.
I was going to say that one of the important things to think about when you're starting is how long this product of yours is going to be out in the market. What's the life cycle of that product going to be? And from there, you can work out what technologies will be relevant to you to be able to support that product throughout its life cycle. There are many, many examples of cases where people have deployed and everything has worked very well, but way shorter than the time that their business case was indicating. The products have come to the end of life, either because the technology that was supporting that solution is no longer available, or some other factors, environmental factors, have reduced the usability of that product. So it's very important to understand how long you want that product to be out in the market.
Sure, excellent. Thank you, Mohsen. I guess we should move on to another question. I'd like to put this question to Robin Duke-Woolley. It's a question about standardization, and it says, how strong is the need for standardization, or at least some sort of cross-industry framework for IoT security? Robin, what's your view on the need for at least a cross-industry framework for IoT security?
Well, I think a cross-industry framework is extremely important. I mean, so I made the point that there are interoperability of systems is going to become increasingly important, because not only within a company having interoperation of systems within a company, but across companies as well. So collaboration and partnering and so forth all need to be taken into account and brought into focus. And how do you create a security and standardization sort of structure for that? Well, I think it's quite difficult. I think you can't have just one standard for security. You've got to have probably many different ones at different levels, and there has to be a recognition of how they work together. So I think that having a framework that provides a basis for that is an essential starting point. And there's quite a lot of work that's been done in that area, and I'm sure that we'll see a lot more of that over the next few years.
Great, thank you, Robin. Mohsen and Evan, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, obviously, security is an absolute essential, and we probably need some form of means by which information can be shared about attacks, and information about fraudulent behaviours can be analysed, and defence plans can be worked out. How do you see that developing?
I think the whole question around standards, obviously everybody would love to have standards defined, which makes the deployments a lot easier, and interoperability, as Robin was referring to, even better. However, the reality is that no one is waiting for the standards to be written and fortified and utilized, I think standards will emerge, and it would be de facto standards based on the experience that people have had over the years of deploying. But in the short term, if people are going to wait for standards, they're going to wait for a long time.
Sure. Absolutely, and I guess the market doesn't have the patience and simply cannot wait, because many of the opportunities will have passed by if we wait for a traditional standards cycle to elapse in the kind of traditional ITU or ETSI way. So I absolutely take the point that we just need to keep moving, but in a responsible way. I think we've got time for one more question. We've had several questions in about the specific capabilities of Aeris offerings, which we will answer offline after the event, because they are quite specific, and I don't think they'll be of interest to all of the audience at once. But thanks very much for those questions, and we'll be certain to get answers to everyone who asked those questions. The final question that we have is, and I'd like to ask every member of the panel this, what is the main reason we would fail at scaling up IoT? So it's the main reason for failure. And could we start with Robin, if you're ready to answer that question?
Well, what's the main reason why we would fail at scaling up IoT? I guess because we don't plan it. And I think that if we don't look far ahead of what it is that we are trying to do and just implement something that is in the short term, then I think that that's the problem. So the point that I was making in my presentation, my couple of slides at the beginning, is that it's not just the solution today that matters. It's getting the solution tomorrow right, and thinking about that. So I would say that is the main issue.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robin. And Mohsen, what's your view on the reason why we could fail at scaling up IoT?
Again, I think Robin is correct in terms of, it's not very often I agree with Robin, but I do agree with him on this.
Well, thank you so much.
Long term. But I do agree that if we don't sort out the interoperability, we end up building islands that are not going to be able to talk to each other. And limit the ability to scale and deploy globally and create this IoT paradigm that the vision that has been created. And to get there, we need to be able to have this interoperability sorted.
Sure. Thank you, Mohsen. And Evan, do you have anything to add? I appreciate that Robin and Mohsen may have taken the key reasons, but are there any other things you would like to add?
Yeah, I think they did beat me to that point, but which I certainly agree with. But one other thing I would add is that I think that from what I've seen, one of the reasons that companies have failed in IoT and have failed to scale in IoT is that they haven't generated enough momentum early. And I think that IoT is such a broad set of possibilities that sometimes companies, when they're first designing their solution, they're not actually solving any specific business issues for their customers. They're trying to do all things to all companies. Therefore, they don't actually end up doing anything that people are willing to buy and pay for. And so, especially when first launching and when first rolling out, to be very specific in what you're looking to accomplish, what problem you're looking to solve for your customer, and understanding exactly who that customer is, that's going to make you successful early, which is then going to, again, assuming that the planning has been done correctly and so forth, be the driver that's going to propel you forward to a much larger solution. So that's the other piece I would add.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Evan. I'm afraid we've unfortunately run out of time today, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our attendees for sparing the time, and I'd like to thank our panel in particular: Robin Duke-Woolley, the Chief Executive of Beecham Research; Evan Whitelock, the Product Manager at Aeris; and Mohsen Inia, the Vice President of Market Development at Aeris. It's been a pleasure to have you all on the webinar today. So thanks again for all your inputs. Goodbye.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.